Greetings. Good morning to everyone that is tuning in for another morning episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. For tuning in live, I especially thank you for giving me your time so early. Rise and shine, folks. In the book, The Natural History of the Rich, a field guide, Richard Conniff writes, quote, almost all successful alpha personalities display a single minded determination to impose their vision on the world, an irrational belief in unreasonable goals, bordering at times on lunacy. To celebrate my 200th episode and to take a break from the exhaustion of political and social commentary, figured I'd share some thoughts on success and fulfillment in life. So let us go. All right. Good morning. Thank you for tuning in again. So, what gave me this idea? Well, the fun part about that is I actually didn't have an idea. So, like literally yesterday, I was thinking about what am I going to talk about in the morning, and I didn't really see anything that caught my attention on social media, and so I was like, man, I don't have an episode. And a few episode there was I don't know, a week ago, I didn't have an episode, and I didn't have an idea, so I just didn't do an episode. I was hoping that an idea would come to mind, and I just didn't do one, and so that was that. But I didn't like that because I need to be consistent. This is a show Monday through Friday, so you have to have episodes Monday through Friday, right? Like that just makes sense. So, so I was thinking about it, and I was like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do because part of it was I spent my spare time yesterday on lawn work, but I also didn't want to miss the episode. So late last evening, I thought, well, maybe since this is my 200th podcast episode, and I know if somebody's really paying attention, technically it might be like the 199th or something. I might have missed one or misnumbered, but where I am now, it's the 200th, right? Like if you have to go back probably about 100 episodes before you find the one that's misnumbered somewhere. So to celebrate my 200th episode, you know what? Oh, whoa, whoa. Okay, that's enough. Enough of that silliness. Okay, so to celebrate my 200th episode, I was like, maybe I'll talk about success, right? Like, It seemed like a bad idea. But at the same time, I'm like, it is really hard to think of things in terms of success because a lot of times it's the way that we define success. We define success in such a way that it kind of keeps it away from us. So I might say, well, this is my 200th episode. And then I might look at somebody like Tom Woods, who's well past his 2000th episode, right? So, like, if I compare me to him, well, then, yeah, that's not very successful, right? Or his audience, right? Like, he's got a huge audience, and my audience is much, much, much smaller. So, if I define it, and, if I'm comparing myself, then it makes it difficult to think of things in terms of success. But that's what I kind of decided to do. And I said, we're going to roll with it. We'll see what we come up with. Then I woke up in the middle of the night. Like literally it was like, I don't know, 1 in the morning or something like that. 12. I don't know. I went to bed at like 9:30, 10 o'clock, fell asleep. And I woke up a couple of hours later and I was laying there for a few minutes. And I I happened to remember this exchange I had with Eric D. July. Eric July. You may know him and maybe you don't, but he is a musician and a comic book writer. And he also happens to be a libertarian as well. And he last year he unveiled his new publishing company, Ripaverse. And their goal initially, when they were running their campaign to raise money, was to raise $100,000. Well, they ended up raising like $3 million. So like, they went crazy. They went crazy over their goal. And kudos to him. Like that's really really awesome. I love seeing other people, meet their goals and then some. So I had an exchange with him recently. Probably it wasn't a very long one. He had put out there something to. Well, let's just put it up on the screen. Let's do it that way. How about that? Let's see here. There it is. So he said, "All right, for the next hour, Twitter Q&A. Ask me anything about the Rippaverse, creativity or business wise, and I'll do my best to answer without spoilers because people like to ask him what's coming up. What would you like to know about the Rippaverse?" So I asked him, "Did you ever feel like quitting? If so, what got you through?" And here was his response. He said, "Never. It's not an option. Success is obviously a big motivator for me, but I have a lot of aspirations. I'm living a dream right now, and obstacles or challenges is just that. They are meant to be overcome." And I agree with him. I think that's the proper framing when you're looking at the things that you're doing. Now, when we define success, a lot of times we're doing more of a comparison. But even when we actually try to define it, we don't really define it so well because a lot of people define it like, how much money do you make? Do you have fancy cars? Do you own a lot of properties? Is your house a 5,000 square foot house, 10,000? Whatever. And I think those are achievements, and that's nice. But I think to define success in the most simple way is just to say, did you achieve fulfillment in what you set out to do? And that can be big or small. So let me tell you a little story, and I'm going to give you this story will be an example of something that's a little bit on the big side. So in my 30s, I was, I was living in North Carolina, and I was interacting with people from the technology community, the hacker community, if you will, and a lot of them had encouraged me to pursue software development, writing code, and I hadn't really done that up until that point. I mean, I tooled around with it, and I did a few things here and there on at work, but that's not really what I did as my primary role. So they encouraged me. So I started studying web development and, started studying with a couple friends and we would go over things. I would sit down, he would teach me stuff. And then one of my friends, he worked at a big bank and he worked as like a team lead or something like that. And he's like, "Look, we're looking for a new developer. I can get you in the door. And then it's on you to impress everybody." And the way this interview worked was I would first meet with the development team. So there was like five guys or something like that. Maybe I think there was about five people. So I'd meet with the development team, and then I would meet with the database team, and then I would meet with the guy that was the hiring manager, the manager of the team. Okay, and so it was like an intense interview. It was like 2 hours, and during my interview, I made some awful mistakes, some of the worst mistakes possible. And I'm trying to think if I could explain them in a way where if you don't know, coding and all that, that it would make sense. But basically, I was asked a question, and then they said, "Okay, you're writing this bit of code here. Um, why would you use this particular data type?" And a data type is, for simplicity, is just simply a way that computers handle certain types of information. So my name would be like a string because it's just all letters. But like the number one, just the literally number one would be one type of data type. And then if I had a decimal, 1 point something, then that would be a different data type. So in this particular case, they asked me, they said, well, why did you choose this particular data type to handle this result? And I blanked. And I just said the first thing that I could think of. I said, because it's bigger, which doesn't make any sense. Like it didn't make any sense at all. Not in that particular context. And so it was almost like I would have been better off just saying, I guessed. That would have been a better answer. So so w- ultimately I didn't get the job. And it was quite embarrassing. In fact, when I walked out, and it was weird because, like, in the interview, I could see the train wrecking, and I could do nothing to stop it. It was like just crashing, right? And it was so embarrassing. But then it got worse when I left because then I left and I got in my car and I was like, "Oh my god, I said this." And then, "Oh my god, I said that." And then I was like, "Oh." And I was like, all those terrible answers. At the time, my now wife had moved, or I believe she had already moved to Jacksonville, or I think she was in Jacksonville for whatever reason. I can't remember if she was visiting or had already moved. But I was coming. It was a Friday, and I was going to come down and visit her right after the interview. So I left the interview. I'm getting ready now to head down to Jacksonville for the weekend and hang out with my fiance now. And I pull over on the side of the road, like the side of the highway, and I grab my phone and I start typing out all the better answers. I was like, "This one," and then I email it, hoping that I would get a second shot, and I did not. Like it was awful. It was so bad, and it was so embarrassing. So it was total failure. Okay, but I moved down to Jacksonville, and then I studied. I continued studying for a year, just hit it hard, and I decided that under no circumstances was I going to have an experience like that again. So once I decided that I was ready to give it a second shot after about a year, I had met some people and I said, I'm looking for a job. And this guy was like, well, my company is hiring. Let me bring you in. And so in the interview, I was being asked questions. And the one challenge that I did have, I wasn't always familiar with the specific terms. And one of the guys picked up on that. And he said, okay, hold on. Because he saw me having a little bit of a struggle. And he said, so this and this and this. And he, put something out on the whiteboard. And then I answered it. And he goes, okay, I get it. You just didn't know the term, but you understood the concept, right? And so that's what I had focused on. I had focused on learning the concepts so that I could utilize them. And then if somebody would ask me a question like, why did you do this? I could explain why I did this. And the only thing that I was missing at that point was just a strong mastery of the terms. And that's always been, for whatever reason, it's always been something that's been a challenge for me. Like I know lots and lots of things, but I don't always remember the specific term that necessarily goes with it. It's kind of a weird thing. I don't know. But so I ended up getting the job. So I got the job. So the second time around, I got the job and actually did very, very, very well, especially if I compare myself to me, which is what I think success is all about. It's all about comparing yourself to you. Now that was the big example, right? We're talking about achieving fulfillment because what I wanted to do, I was studying so that I could go into an entirely different field. And so the fulfillment for me at that time was I want to leave this line of work and go into this line of work. and I need to get my foot in the door. And I did. Right? So that's my big example of success. Now, what about a small example? Because here's where things are going to start taking a turn. Because I don't think that's I think that the way that we tend to define success, the way we compare our success is one, we compare it to somebody else's success. And then number two, we define it as basically getting a bunch of things. But I don't think either one of those are actually very valuable or correct for that matter. So we want to look at a small example because I think that plays a role too. So I've been working on my yard this week in my spare time. So I'll go out and I'll do a bunch of yard work, and it's more than just cutting the grass. I have a hill that on the back of the yard that goes down to a lake, and that hill is just full of vegetation. And I've got some ideas in mind on what I want to do with that. So I have been working steadily on clearing that out. But I've also been taking care of the rest of the yard. So, doing the trimming and doing the cutting of the grass. Here's where fulfillment comes into play. One of my favorite things to do, let's say it's a Monday, I cut my grass. One of my favorite one thing that gives me just immense enjoyment when I pour my cup of coffee, put on my shoes, and I step outside when it's light out. And I step outside and I just look at my yard that I completed the day before because it just looks if it's like looking at somebody and saying, "Wow, you got your hair cut." Like you notice it immediately. Like I feel the same way, but I actually am fulfilled by it. I can notice that my yard looks different the next day. I just walk out and I just look at it. And I'm like, wow, this looks good. And then I enjoy taking. I'm very fulfilled from that work when I take that first sip of coffee. I'm just looking across my yard and I'm like, who's the guy that did all that awesome work? Oh, that was me. So now let me give you another quote from that same book that I read a moment ago, Richard Conniff. So his book, The Natural History of the Rich, and it's basically like a playful way of his book is a playful description of wealthy people compared to the animal kingdoms. It's a very interesting book. I definitely recommend it. So there's a portion in there where they're talking about um, uh, where they're talking about they're talking about specifically about apes, and then they're kind of like comparing them to some very successful people. But that quote that I read a moment ago, uh, almost all successful alpha personalities. No, I'm sorry. Is it similar? Yeah. I got 2 quotes, I'm sorry, so I got a little bit lost there. So, there's 2 quotes. So, the quote that I read earlier, "Almost all successful alpha personalities display a single-minded determination to impose their vision on the world, in a rational belief in unreasonable goals, bordering at times on lunacy." Now that stuff, that kinda sounds like the stuff of billionaires like, Elon Musk and Donald Trump and Mark Zuckerberg, so on and so forth, right? But no, I don't think so. I think that's again just how we present it. Okay. In taming the vegetation on this hill that goes down to my lake, I am effectively imposing my vision on the world, or at least a small portion of the world. My end goal may be unreasonable and to some border on lunacy because it's more than my end goal is more than just cutting down the vegetation. I've got things that I want to do with that. More on that in just a moment. Now, let me read you the second quote from this book that I think is very valuable in this conversation. Here it goes. Let me back up a little bit here. let's let's kind of set the stage for what this is saying. So this is the portion of the book where they're talking about apes and how they behave, and they were just going over a story where one ape kind of exerted some dominance over the other apes. And I think in that particular story, the apes were like several apes had come up and they were going to kind of like out dominance the other one, and then the other one seemed like it was gonna shy away, then all of a sudden did this thing. So, basically, there's just this dominance play going on with these apes. And so they're describing it, and they're saying, that these alpha personalities have, quote, "a blindness to consequences," characterizes many dominant personalities. They don't see obstacles. They may not bother or even be capable of seeing other people's points of view. They tend to think as Aristotle Onassis once put it, the rules are there are no rules. This blindness is what makes them with equal ease outlaws and heroes. Now again, we're sounding like that of like tycoons and politicians and other people who seem to lead the masses. But again, no, disagree. I think that's just how we present it. We present it in a larger social context, but it's the same attitude on a smaller scale is very much applicable to anyone. So now back to my yard and the hill that I'm working on. My ultimate goal is to clear the vegetation, which is not so very difficult, and it's to add a deck with a cantilever and to terrace a portion of it, and then add a fence kind of at the top, but back away a little bit, and then design some of the rest of it as a big hill. Design some of the rest of it so that I can easily maintain it because part of the hill is extremely steep. And so it's very difficult. Like I can't get a mow. I can't use the mower on there. I can only stand on there with the weed trimmer. And then, unfortunately, I have to be very, very careful. Otherwise, I'll fall down the hill because it's like so steep and all this stuff. So I got to try to figure out like, all right, what can I do to make this more maintainable so it just doesn't overgrow and get all crazy, right? And this is the, is this unreasonable? Is this lunatic? Lunacy in the context of I want to own like maybe a big cable company or I want to, be the president of the United States. No, it's not in that context. But in a smaller context, it does kind of represent that same thing, right? This is similar to my once goal of getting a developer job, which I am now a developer. I automate things for a living. You might say, "But DL, those are really all attainable. People, they do those things all the time." Yes. And many people don't because they don't believe they can. Or they do those things, but then they don't do other things that they wish they could do because they don't believe they can. Success is about the work you're willing to put in. It's about the attitude that you have. When I go out into the yard, and this is why I'm using this example, because I think everyday people will understand this. When I go out into the yard, I don't think in terms of, well, I'll just quit, or I can't do it, or this obstacle's too big. No, I'm like, I figure out how to do it. How do I how do I cut down this vegetation without slipping and falling down the hill? How do I build a deck on this hill? Right? These are all problems that I have to solve. Or as Eric put it, quitting is not an option. And these are obstacles and challenges that are meant to be overcome. They just happen to be at a smaller scale. But the reality is, if you can handle something at the smaller scale, if you can have the right attitude at a smaller scale, then you can apply that same attitude to something at a bigger scale. That's how life works. That's why I believe that things as simple as switching careers in your 30s to something that you've never done before, to or uh, landscaping like crazy in your yard. I think these are very applicable to other things because the same attitude, the same behaviors are involved. When I go out to the yard, I look at it, I'm going to exert my dominance over this yard, and I'm not letting anything get in my way. Come hell or high water, I'm going to make this happen. Now, in some ways, maybe just simple grass cutting wouldn't work, but in this particular case, I've got huge plans of things that I want to do, and it's taken me a long time to do these things because I have to plan them out. The more I read and study, then I go, oh crap, there's this obstacle I have to think about. Oh, I got to think about this. Okay, I got to think about this, and I've went back to the drawing board multiple times. That's not unlike any other thing that you do. You will meet an obstacle, you will meet a challenge, and sometimes you have to sit back and think about, how do I overcome this challenge? The reason that I think that success is about fulfillment, like succeeding, achieving the things that make you fulfilled is because when you feel that feeling, it becomes worth it. But also, knowing the feeling that you're expecting to get from what you're doing helps drive you along the way. Now, when I first started this podcast, because I'm 200 episodes in, I had no equipment and I had no idea what I was doing. Like, I really had no idea. And I'll tell you another thing. Actually didn't even know that like lots of libertarians have podcasts. Because if I did, I probably would not have done it. It wasn't until later when I knew about a one or two and I was like, oh, okay, podcast. That seems like a good idea. I should do that. And I had no idea that like at the time there were like, I don't know, 100 other podcasts for the libertarians. And had I known that, had I went out and saw all that, I would have been like, man, the market's already saturated. No way. And I probably wouldn't have bothered. But I didn't know any better, which is a good thing. Thought that was a fun side note. But I had no equipment and I had no idea what I was doing. So the first piece of equipment that I got, the first microphone was a cheap headset. And it sounded terrible. It was like literally a headset. And at the time I wasn't doing video, right? So I got this headset and it's terrible sounding. And I was like, man, I got to get a different mic. But I didn't know anything about microphones. So the second microphone that I got was a cheap microphone and it produced inconsistent sound. So I ended up returning it because, like, I would literally watch it and, like, the sound would be really loud, and then the next time I would record, the sound wouldn't be as loud. It was, like, really weird, and I was like, "Okay, that's not gonna work." The 3rd microphone that I got was actually decent. So I finally got a decent mic on the 3rd one, and then the 4th one, which is this one right here, this 4th microphone, this is a nice microphone. It's not like the top of the line, but it's a nice microphone. So I went through 4 iterations of microphones because I had no idea what I was doing. All I knew was that I'm going to speak and say things, and then I had to learn a lot of things along the way. There were umpteen challenges that I had. And this was when I first started out. I had only the challenge of dealing with audio. So I had to learn how to edit audio. I had to learn, okay, where do I put this audio once I'm done? How do I now promote my podcast? How do I get people to listen to it? Okay, now I need some graphics because everything, all these websites, they want some sort of artwork. I don't do artwork. So there was just challenge after challenge after challenge. And remember, my first, you may not know this, depending on how long you've been listening, but my first podcast episode came out in December of 2019. So I've been doing this for 4 years. And eventually I moved on from just only audio to audio and video. And then that presented an entirely new set of challenges. And I just kept overcoming them and overcoming them. In fact, I could probably spend an entire episode just talking about the challenges that I faced and the things that I overcome. It was actually quite the learning experience. But it's been this is the path to success. And it's the same path on my podcast, working on my yard, in my employment. It's the same path everywhere. There are challenges. The only difference between them is really the scope, right? Like on my yard, I'm literally working on one small plot of the world. If I was a big, huge developer and I wanted to develop big, a shopping complex, there would be yet, it'd be a bigger part of the earth, so it'd be bigger and there'd be a lot more challenges to overcome. But again, it's the same concept. The concepts are the same. I'm imposing some sort of vision in the space that I can operate. And the only thing that was required of me was the choice to keep going. And as I did, I got better and better. As the saying goes, luck favors the prepared. So this episode, I just kind of wanted to talk about my thoughts because I think that everybody can be successful and I think that everybody can be fulfilled. And I want to encourage you to go out and find that success. Find out what fulfills you, but don't compare yourself to other people. I could compare myself to all kind of podcasters who have huge audiences, and that won't do me one bit of good. It'll make me feel bad because I'll be like, oh man, this guy's got 10 million listeners. I got 300 some, right? Subscribers on my YouTube channel, um, and that will make me feel bad. But if I compare myself to myself, to what I did previously, well, I'm actually on an upward trajectory. And that's a good thing. And that means that I can enjoy what I'm doing. Right. So define success by what fulfills you. Recognize that success comes in different forms, big and small. Always be willing to impose your vision on the world, even if the world is as simple as your lawn. And above all, big one is the big one. I'm 4 years in now. Don't stop. I haven't stopped. I've had some time where I took, some downtime, and I had some time where I was like writer's block, podcaster's block. I don't know, where I always having trouble coming up with ideas for episodes. And, those were all obstacles, and I faced them and I continued on. So here I am, right? Doing this podcast, and people are listening to it. And hopefully, even if you don't want a podcast, you want something else. So my hope for you is that you get out there and you achieve it. You find your way to what will fulfill you. So that's what I've got for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I had a lot of fun thinking about, like, okay, how am I going to talk about success as a relatively small time podcaster? But then it dawned on me, like, wait a minute. I'm much more successful than I was a year ago, than I was 2 years ago, than I was when I first started. Because when I go back and listen to my first podcast episodes, I was like, ooh, that was rough. Like, who is that guy? I hope he's not me, but it is me. And that's okay. And that's a good thing. It's good that I cringe on my old stuff, because that means I've gotten better. So, with that, good morning, Keith. Happy Thursday, and greetings to you as well. Anybody else that's out there, good morning to you as well. Thank you for tuning in. That is my episode for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to catch me every morning, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern, for an informed discussion on politics and culture. In fact, tomorrow I'm bringing Tub back on. We're doing this new thing every Friday. He's going to come on, and we're going to talk about, we're just kind of lay it out and say, all right, this week, here are some things that happened. Here are some things that were popular on social media. Are these things that really need to take our time? And we'll discuss why. And then he will kind of advise us on the things that should get our attention, because there's a lot going on out there, but not everything needs our attention. And then you can join me on Sundays at 7 p.m. with my co host, Susan Hogarth. We're going to look across the vastness of tyranny in this country, and we're going to find out what the Libertarian Party members are doing at their state and local level. Be sure to do all the proper audience actions. Subscribe to my YouTube channel over at youtube.libertydad.com. You can also go to rumble.libertydad.com. If you can get me up to 5 subscribers on Rumble, I can start streaming to there, I believe. That appears to be the requirement. And I think I'm at 3, so I can use 2 more. So if you are on Rumble as a user, go over there and subscribe to me, so that I can start streaming to there as well. Videos are forthcoming. If you want to follow me on social media, do so. Liberty Dad on Facebook, Liberty Dad Pod on Twitter, or go old school. Email me at libertydadpodcast@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Lastly, remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time.